We are going to update the USDA plantings with Jerry Gidel and talk about the market reaction on that right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Hello, Jerry. So, how are you today after the USDA planting and grain stocks reports? I saw an unchanged number for soybeans, and that we got a reaction in the markets, closing 80 cents higher than the previous week.
Yes, yes, it was a snappy response there, to say the least. You'd think, well, unchanged number maybe would be, positive, but maybe not that big a jump. But the expectations were for about 700 to 750,000 more acres, and so the unchanged number definitely caught people off guard. And interestingly enough, kind of followed the grand tradition here of the trade expectations to be higher than what turned out to be the case. This is the 7th out of 9 years in a row on that one. From there, and so that being the factor there, that and the other thing that added to this thing, and it is the fact that the stocks reports showed still a pretty wide gap between the calculated data and what we had for the stocks being projected from the USDA. But definitely the beans attention grabbed there on the plantings at this point. The interesting thing about that too is that the North Dakota and areas in the northern plains that got really delayed plantings, and actually got some of the soybeans not even being planted, is where some of that big jump is. So we're at this point, at least, switching some of the acres around, because interestingly enough, we had two states go up to go on plantings. We had two states to go down in plantings in the western plains on beans, and so it kind of been unchanged. So that's a real interesting twist on this thing. We're going to have some things shifting around here with less producing states jumping on plantings at this point. And the other big quick thing before we go back into the general number is the fact that in general, some of our yield trends could be impacted because of the fact we're not doing this in the big numbers. But going back to the overall numbers here, corn was plantings were about 1.2 million higher than expected on that, really just a smidgen under 92 million in that. And definitely the strong basis levels, the relationship to soybeans definitely attracted people here in the corn. The Western Corn Belt had the biggest jump in seedings out there on that one. And actually, we had increases all across the country, but the biggest jump was out in the areas that didn't get planted last year. Actually, I think we had about a 1.4 million jump in just Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota on corn plantings this year. And so, the prospects for those added acres to be at top yield potential is something to keep in mind. From there, the overall total, interestingly enough, now that includes, of course, wheat, sorghum, other small grains and stuff like that. The actual number here on that total was closer to 254.9 it was on that. And so the scenario on that definitely took the excuse me, took the number above expectations, and a lot of that came from the standpoint of the cotton market, cotton plantings. That's a kind of a outlier at times. We had a big jump last year on it, but we didn't see the harvested numbers come through on that because of well, the one thing that's a part of the USDA's support system is if you get something out on the ground, if it doesn't pan out, you get a prevent planting or some kind of compensation for it from there. I think that's one of the features that could be a factor in the wheat yet as we go into the spring. We've got the wheat number, actually, of all things, when the numbers came out today, everyone's anticipating winter wheat numbers to go down 3 to 500,000. Instead, they went up primarily because there was a big adjustment in Kansas's numbers by 600,000 acres. And that really is an interesting twist on it. We had a big jump in Texas last fall, and that didn't really change this time around. But interestingly enough, some of the wheat or some of the fields out there got planted after the first part of December, which didn't get counted. Maybe they couldn't see it because it's definitely pretty dry out there, so there wasn't any sprouts going on from that point. So in general, the wheat numbers also has some real twists on it as we go through on these things on that. And so in turn, the total number is kind of the highest we've had since way back in 2014, 2015. But that in itself is, I'm not sure it's going to tell us that we're going to have a heyday here of harvested acres and tremendous production. The weather situation here in the U.S. is still very tenuous in the western U.S. plains. And right now, we still got some of the numbers are projecting for the northern plains, basically North Dakota, northwest Minnesota, and that, and even northern parts of South Dakota. They're still under a significant snowbank, and they've had some snows here again as the storm system went through yesterday and today. And there's another one projected for next week. And so we're talking about another potential foot to as high as 15, 17 inches more of snow up there, 1st of April. So that means last year we had a similar situation. I'd have to say that the one that really capped things off last year was a pretty wet spring of rain. But right now, at least, I'm not so optimistic, even if the people in the northern plains are optimistic about getting things planted. That's something to be watching very, very closely on stuff. So overall, the planting situation had some real twists and turns, really highlighted by the fact that the soybean number didn't have a change, and the corn number, the big increases were in some tenuous areas. Actually, one last little twist of fate here. Kansas, one of the driest states in the U.S. right now, actually projected 100,000 more acres of corn plantings. So lots of producers out there hoping it's going to rain or not rain, depending on where you're at, to get some of these expanded acres, because they're looking at that prize of very strong corn prices.
Now, in terms of the stocks, it's a very different story. Only the wheat stocks are higher than expected. How do you see how this is?
Well, the wheat stocks are just 10 or 15 million higher, so it does suggest maybe that some of the very poor wheat feedings we've had are even poorer than we expect. But really, the one that added to the excitement in the soybeans was the soybean stocks number. The number that came through here at 1.685 billion bushels was about like 57 million less than the average estimate from there. And it was when that situation comes along here, that really suggests that they mentioned the residual situation. There's one in soybeans. There's also one in corn. The corn happens to be covered up with feed usage too, so it's a feed and residual there. But on the soybean side of things, that particular number calculated out from the previous quarter that was 186 million down to only 179 million. So it was 6 or 7 million only change on it, which is very unusual. Usually you get a significant reduction because in the fall you have lots of things moving through the transportation systems and barges and things like that, and you also start to see beans move into the soybean processing industry for seed beans. And so normally you have 50. I went back and my guess was looking at the kind of the averages we've had over the last 7 or 8 years, and it was around 50 or 55 million. I think I used 55. And so now all of a sudden it's only 6. To me, that's really a strong indication. Now it's you don't want to totally jump to that that's going to be that, because sometimes producers look at their bins and they can't figure out how much is in there or not in there because they're just looking in from the top. But at the same time, the bushels out there could be less than expected. And so we could have a reduction in the crop size going forward. And potentially, just quick figure, that could be 50 or 60 billion. So that's a pretty significant number if you're talking 210 million as our current carryover stock. We won't see that adjustment come from the USDA in April, things like that. Everybody's going to hold their water in Washington, D.C. But at the same time, it's something that definitely is something to keep a sharp eye on. And I think that's added to the enthusiasm we had in beans when that residual didn't adjust downward as we saw some of these beans that were missing. All of a sudden, what happens is the residual gets found as it goes along. And so all of a sudden that residual should have been a lot closer to just say quick figure 130, 135 from the 180 number, and it wasn't. So that to me is something that's important to watch. The corn number also had about a 60 million or 70 million feed difference between the trade expectations, but they're 7.4 billion number. Also is interesting. It did suggest that we did have a little stronger feed demand than some people were looking for, and to some extent, from what I can see here, that kind of seems to follow the USDA's current excuse me 5.295 number here on feed usage scenario. So it was a number that I was a little closer to, but it was one of those scenarios where we in this whole scenario of looking at these stocks numbers, at least wasn't as egregious as what happened over in the soybeans at this point. From there, so the interesting world out here is that these numbers always seem to be a little bit squeegee this time of year. They don't always kind of fit what the economics says or what the world thinks. We've had some numbers in the past that people were planning for the USDA farm bill, and all of a sudden we had a huge jump in the plantings that turned out to not be there by the time we got to June. So things can start out one direction and change as we go through the next 60 to 80 days.
Now, the big question mark I'll leave for you will be about the upcoming soybean prices and wheat prices, because on the background, we'll still have the weather in Argentina, but still we have Brazil expecting a record crop of 150 million metric tons. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, that has been a kind of the conflict between expectations. We've had our problems in Argentina. We've had a substantially good crop, but I wouldn't say it's a great crop because I don't know that the yield is going to be as snappy as it has been in the past here because of some problem, or because of some dryness, I should say, in Rio Grande and maybe parts of Paraná, and that in soybeans, and also let me flip it over into the corn. There's another issue there too, but I agree that that's really the interesting one. We have pressed these prices up on yesterday's rallies on things up until kind of some interesting areas here with spot beans back above $15 and that. I think there's a kind of a at this point, I think there's a chance this market could try to push back towards the recent highs around the 1540, 1550. We're really, though, going to have to, I think, find something in Argentina that's going to end up reducing our total supplies a little bit further to get above that level. I guess I'm got to keep a close eye on that. There's a combination of events here. We could just, all of a sudden we could have a big rally going here, or it could just kind of push back to the old highs. And I kind of think that's the first stage of this thing for next week or thereabouts. And that, the one thing that will get the reaction to this, and then we got to start to see what the USDA is going to do on their April supply demand numbers. And that's where my interesting idea about last year's crop size, will they even take a nod towards maybe saying that, yes, that stock report does suggest we might have smaller beginning stocks here, beginning crop and stocks. And that's to me is an interesting one. The wheat type situation is definitely still going to be tied up with the U.S. Weather forecast and what happens there. Checking with a good source in Southwest, he remains very, very concerned that if the rains do not come in the next 14 to maybe 21 days, that a significant portion of that winter wheat crop, which supposedly now is even higher than we thought, could be actually have the USDA adjusters come out and declare it dead. In essence, they're having issues with that. And right at this point, there hasn't been any of that issue going on because they've really told the producers that it doesn't look good, but I can't tell you one way or the other until after the April 1st. I can't make a judgment until then. And exactly right. There's been times where the wheat crop can bounce back if it gets rain. But the one thing I think is here interesting on this thing is I don't know that the producers out there put a lot of ingredients or inputs into this thing this year, so it makes it even tougher for a crop to kind of weather bad, tough weather conditions and that. And so if there's not the fertilizer out there, there isn't the seeds out there. If we have the dry weather we've had, they can meet more and more of those acres not come to fruition. So that's going to be the big twist on the U.S. wheat. I know the world situation at this point, the Black Sea corridor has been extended and that kind of stuff, but at the same time, if wheat's going to try to get any kind of enthusiasm going, it's going to have to be from what's going on in the mindset here in the U.S. And that because there really isn't a lot of other crops. India is the only one on the agenda here that's next in line for a harvest, and there doesn't seem to be any major issues going on there. So right now, at least, the corn market, a little bit of a follower here after the report because of the acreage we just talked about being higher and that. But as I said, I think where some of these acreages have been projected at this point increase, and definitely rebounding because of the weather in the northern plains. But even now, what caught my eye is that Kansas is going to hope to plant more corn in an area that it's already in pretty tough shape. Now, I know that a lot of that's not in the eastern part of the state and maybe in northwest corner, and it's not really projected out there in the toughest areas of the state. But even then, this market or these yields that are out here from the USDA, the trend line yields this time, I think I've got more issues than they sometimes have. Right now, the world and the USDA are all betting on El Nino to show up here and change everything and the trends we've had on yields in the U.S. for the last 3 or 4 years. So maybe that's the case, and we'll see what happens. But right now, at least, I think the market's going to be real nervous, and we'll continue to be watching both the U.S. Plain situations and what's going on in Argentina.
Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. It's always good to talk, Luis, and we'll see if the world is going to keep the nervous as they were yesterday.